So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for investing your time with us on this Saturday morning. My name is Camelia. I'm the moderator of today's Fireside session. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to all of you for investing time in your own leadership skills. And I think that we have got some audience coming all the way from Philippines, Vietnam, US as well. Yeah, so if I've left out any countries, please type in the chat or comment so that we can give you a warm welcome. Thank you very much again. Okay, so just a brief background about myself. I'm the founder of Kabel, a Tinder for jobs. I founded this to help leaders to connect to their future hires through purpose, vision, and mission, which leads to our very first Fireside chat today to talk about building and leading high-performance team as a leader. We'll cover some of the practices we need to keep our eyes on that could help us with our leadership with our amazing guest speakers today. But before we dive into our guest speaker introduction, I just want to take a temperature of the room. Here's a simple poll for you. Let us know if you are a business leader, a business owner, HR practitioner, or somebody who is completely new or about to enter into a leadership role. You get 10 seconds on this. Okay, thank you very much. 40% of you guys are HR practitioners, corporate business leaders, 20%, business owners, 20%, another 20% about to enter a leadership role. So that's awesome. Thank you. So everyone, please feel free to say hi to all the other participants in the chat. Don't be shy. Okay, thank you. Our goal today is to build awareness on the importance of leadership in building a high-performance business through their best asset, people. Now, we say people leave managers, not companies. It's a common refrain you hear when corporate leadership is discussed. But is it really true? Any one of you experienced this? So why do people leave their bosses? Here's an interesting study done by AIA Malaysia called Geram Kerja Study in 2019 with 2,113 respondents all over Malaysia who ranked their top reasons why they want to quit a job. So here we go. 44% of them says company culture sucks. 40% of them say my boss is driving me mad. Another 39% of them say I'm not paid enough for what I'm doing. 37% of them say people don't appreciate me. And 31% of them say I'm just not growing. All right, so here's the format to give you an idea of what to expect today. We'll take a few moments for each of the speakers to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about themselves in the industry or the company. I'll kick off the conversation asking questions that draw out some high-level practices we should be thinking about to make us better leaders. So if you have any questions, just leave a comment in the Q&A section. During the second half of the session today, we'll take time, open the floor and answer some of the questions that you have posted. And if you have spotted a good question, press like so we know that which are the favorite popular questions and we'll attend to that. Sounds good? Great. So let's start with the guest speaker introduction. Let's bring on board Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hi, good morning, Camelia.
Good morning to you. Thank you for being with us today. Now, Karen, hi, Lalit. Good morning to you.
Hi, good morning, Camelia. How are you?
Look, I'm good, thank you. Looking dashing today, huh?
Thank you.
So Karen is the HR Director, Southeast Asia of MCOR Flexible Asia Pacific. She's a firm believer in developing high-performing teams to sustain long-term performance. She's passionate in driving the organization to bring live talent strategies that support business growth and talent development. Karen's vast experience in leading change, building an inclusive culture, and currently is the pillar lead in championing D&I, diversity and inclusion, work-life integration pillar at MCOR Flexibles Asia Pacific. We're very excited to hear from some pointers from you, Karen. Right. So over to Lalit. Lalit is a corporate leader and a startup mentor. He co-founded Educe, an education platform that is architectured to transform and redefine the global education system. So watch out this space. The platform delivers the world's first intelligent micro-education system by leveraging the new age technologies like AI, blockchain, and live streaming. Lalit is also a co-founder of Zeal, a first of its kind application aimed at reducing stress and anxiety of its users. I need this already, Lalit. It uses gamification to instill habits that are scientifically proven to reduce stress and anxiety into a user's day-to-day life. He has over 30 years of extensive business leadership experience across APAC and Japan. Lalit has led several large-scale technology-led-based business transformations and has delivered keynote addresses on new technology innovations around big data analytics, social cloud, and mobility. In his last role, Lalit was a CMO at Ecleve Leadership and Governance Center. He's also a leadership coach and faculty for leadership development programs. Lalit has spoken at numerous regional and global conferences on leadership. He focuses on how leadership and management practices need to be changed in today's fast-changing world of digitization, connectivity, and disruption. All right. So, Karen, thank you again for joining us. Sharing from your HR's perspective as we navigate across VUCA environment. So for those of you who are new to VUCA terminology, to me, it just sounds chaotic. So I'll let Karen later to introduce to you what VUCA is. So could you share what do you do in MCOR Flexibles Asia Pacific in the space of work-life integration? Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Camelia. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. I have the pleasure of leading Southeast Asia Business Unit for MCOR Flexibles, covering Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, Singapore, and Malaysia. For those of you who are not familiar with MCOR, we are a global leader in developing and producing responsible packaging for food, beverage, pharmaceutical, medical, home and personal care, and other products with global presence across 40 countries and with a turnover of $12 billion. So that's our annual turnover itself. The journey of diversity and inclusion started back in March 2020 last year, where we focused on 3 pillars, namely women's network, cultural integration, and work-life integration. I'm honored to be spearheading the work-life integration pillar.
Thank you. So Karen, I hear you talk about, psychology safety at workplace. So in this safe zone, employees feel comfortable asking for help, suggesting informally or challenging status quo without the fear of negative social consequences, making it likely that the organization can innovate quickly, right? So can you point us to a direction on what type of specific skills of a leader that can create a safer and high performance work environment?
Excellent question, Camelia. Amy Edmondson, a Novartis professor at Harvard, once championed the phrase psychological safety in her book called The Fearless Organization. She described it as a place where we felt safe to take risks and fail. It has come to mean a place where difficult conversations can be had, deep connections can be made, and real relationships can be built, and risks can be shared and taken. Socially aware managers and leaders need to create places of psychological safeties where individuals and teams can work at their challenging best together. But you can only create such space with and for someone when there is some trust built and a relationship is in place.
Interesting.
And understanding others' perspectives and values is important, and we do that by creating meaningful relationships with them at a motivational values level. In order to do this, you need to create places of psychological safety where people feel safe to share things that are important to them, if you are psychologically aware enough to build this space with individuals and on a team level, then if you're able to use that place to think about and talk about things that really important things, then as a leader, you'll be going to make a significant impact to move the team forward. So some of the notable psychological safety benefits are better levels of communication, sharing of knowledge, and increased level of engagement, more openness to learn, including learning from failure. Remember, I've mentioned to you learning how to fail and creating a safe space, improved performance with more creativity and innovation, increased level of initiative, such as identifying ways of working around processes that impacts performance, positive employee attitudes, including more commitment to the organization. So long story short, it's a key to unlock discretionary efforts.
Interesting. But we're in a highly competitive environment, Karen, most of the time now, especially now, right? So I've seen some counterproductive actions in bosses. Yeah. So can you describe what microaggression is? What does it mean in the workplace? How to identify them?
That's a very interesting term. So microaggression is a term that's usually used briefly in teams, and often unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. There are many forms of microaggressions at the workplace, some of which the most common types that we encounter would be spoke in a condescending tone, roll our eyes or sigh during a meeting. That's when pre-COVID days where you have physical face-to-face meetings. The other one would be consistently ignore a person's email or instant message. That is where we would notice when we are very overwhelmed in the current and virtual environment where constantly you're either on meetings, calls, text messages, and instant messages. This could probably happen. The other common one would be interrupted a person's mid-sentence. Also made an assumption about someone's ability without checking. And the other one that's very common would be dismissed or ignored someone's contribution. Micro messages are small unconscious behaviors that's often rooted in our own biases. Let's face it, Camelia, all of us have our own sets of beliefs and biases. This is influenced by our own upbringing, education, values, and culture. Over time, they can build up and they have power to make others feel included or excluded. As leaders, we have a responsibility to be conscious of the micro messages that we are sending out. So the counter-reactive to microaggression would be micro-affirmations. Okay. So some of the micro-affirmations would be ensuring your tone of voice was encouraging to everyone, encourage different perspectives, empathize with a person's situation, focus your complete attention on someone when they are speaking. These are all, I would say, no-brainers, but unfortunately, in such environment that we are operating today, we are constantly challenged with the attention span that we have, right? So as I'm speaking right now, I'm actually seeing a lot of messages being popped up. I'm resisting myself to be not looking at the chat messages, although I'm very tempted. So I'm making sure that this is a conscious decision that I'm making.
Okay. So audience, we will type in your questions. We will come back to you the later half of the session. Yeah. Okay. So you were talking about microaggression coming from bosses and they may be doing it unconsciously, right? So as a subordinate, how should one respond to it? I mean, when you have bosses emailing you like middle of the night, do they expect you to, respond directly, immediately?
That's a question that I'm not able to answer, right? Because obviously this is an important question where it's a relationship that needs to be built with the subordinate and the line manager itself. I think let's go back to the fundamentals of rules of engagement. Be clear of what support is required for some specific task, the frequency to connect, agree the desired behavior and agree on the format of communication. This could be very situational dependent. And in today's workforce, we work with a multi-generational workforce. Let's not forget it. We have the Gen Zs all the way to some baby boomers itself who are still in the organization. People have different preference to be communicated. Yesterday, I've interviewed an interesting candidate. He shared with me that, I've actually brought the journey from the team who's constantly being engaged with their mobile phones and not taking notes to I've actually put the phone away from the meetings and start taking notes during a meeting itself. So that is an example of one way of the manager and the team agrees on the rules of engagement. While probably I'm making an assumption here that younger workforce generation would prefer much more on an instantaneous response. So if let's say when we send a text messages, we expect a response immediately in the next half an hour or so, or should I say instant, maybe next couple of minutes, not even half an hour.
Sure.
So that really depends. And in a virtual environment setting right now, where we are constantly turning on, and it's important as a line manager to actually acknowledge that it's not a privilege to work from home, depending on the roles that you're playing. McKinsey has actually mentioned that senior executives who actually work from home feels that they are much more productive as compared to a mid-level or entry-level, because they would have faced different sets of this disruption at the workplace. Because obviously senior executives with higher earning capacity power, they would have their own quarantine space, access to family support, better access to internet connectivity as compared to entry-level or mid-level, where availability of resources for domestic help is not there. So therefore, it varies from person to person.
True. So thank you, Karen, for sharing some of the valuable insights and current best practices to boost employee performance. So before we move on to Lalit's session, audiences, if you have any specific question for Karen, you can just type @Karen and we will attend to that. And again, if you see some of the favorite interesting questions, please click like so that we will know that's a popular question that we need to attend to. So before we move on to Lalit, hi Lalit, let me throw in a question. There was this audience that wrote in during their signing up for the session. So here it is. Feel free, Lalit or Karen, to take this. With the new norm of working from home, what are your thoughts for the team to maintain a strong social fabric? I think strong social fabric is networking, which is critical for effective engagement and collaboration. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about this? Strong social fabric. Karen, you want to go first?
Sure. I think what we are all social creatures. How we connect itself, it has changed certainly. From the pandemic has certainly taught us or even shown us that we are actually very adaptable creatures. And the way how we are actually responding to the change or the environment, everyone is going through a different journey. So I like to use the analogy of pandemic is actually the storm. We are all individual sailing our different boats. So we are all going through a different challenge based on our own circumstances. There's no one person having the same identical situations because our dynamics are very different. So in order to maintain that social connection or social fabric itself, I think it's really important that we are being mindful as a team player, try to keep things within the vicinity of the business hours itself. So I've seen some of the best practice ideas that we have implemented in our business is to allocate probably at every start of the meeting, we talk about the first 15 minutes with what we call as positive gossips. How are you, the check-ins, and you build the understanding of what's happening with each other at the start of the meeting once a month. And I've also seen other teams probably which are much more dynamic and younger. They actually organize, let's say, social Friday evenings around, chatting or after business hours. Of course, that starts with permission. And this concept may not be applicable or workable for team members who are having other family commitments. They are not able to commit after the work hours. in order to build some of the interest itself. If you recall last year, 12 months ago, Singapore was under lockdown. We actually had a team challenge of taking our work from home setup. And we had this as a challenge to say that, hey, look at this. This is how I set up my home office itself. And this is just to create some fun and energy and momentum ongoing. Of course, we are all very creative. There will be different ways to connect. And it's never the same without the face-to-face social corridor chat. That's what I would say. Thanks, Camelia.
Thank you, Karen. Lalit, you have anything to add to that?
No, so I think Karen kind of addressed this issue very, very well. But I think it's a really big challenge that most of the organizations and individuals are facing today. Working from home, it is leading to more isolation, less employee engagement, etc. In fact, for one of my startups, as you mentioned about Zeal, about managing stress and anxiety for people, one of the studies that we had sponsored, it came out by saying that stress and anxiety is becoming a big issue, and social interaction is one of the key areas in which one can work on to address that. So it is definitely extremely important. And the key thing that came out of that study was the role that the organizations today can play in addressing that issue. So it is no longer an individual issue. It is becoming an organizational issue, and the organizations are now looking at it as addressing as the issue at the organization level, and also assigning budgets and activities to address that. So it'll be interesting how the organizations go about doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Lalit. Lalit, so you have 30 years of experience leading big teams and whatnot in companies such as Oracle and Unisys, right? So perhaps you can share with us how leadership concepts and practices has evolved to today's business. Yeah.
So Camelia, first of all, thank you for having me for this fireside chat. It's a real pleasure and
pleasure for us.
Honor to be joining you and Karen for this fireside chat. So I think the things have changed dramatically just in the last 5 to 10 years time. Today, the way we see it is that everything and everyone is connected. And this uber connectivity and emerging technologies are disrupting traditional business models faster than ever before. So the changes that we see around us are revolutionary in nature. They are no longer evolutionary in nature. So the disruptions are happening in every industry sector, not just a particular industry or particular sector or particular geography. I think everybody is affected by that. So the amount of uncertainty, amount of changes that people have to deal with, whether you're a leader or a workforce or as an organization, it is absolutely tremendous. So the question is, how does leadership or how do you manage teams differently in today's environment compared to what it was being done earlier, right? Now, if you look at the scenario today of all the changes and all the uncertainty that you're facing and the organizations are facing or the leaders are facing, there are two mindsets by which you can approach this. One is to be able to look at the scenario and say, this is what I know very well. This is what I'm certain about. This is what I'm sure about. And you start managing what you know or what you're sure about or what you're certain about. And this is what I call as managing the known. That's one mindset, right? The second mindset is that you could go to this scenario and you look at what are the new possibilities, what are the new opportunities that are available out there. How can I as a leader or how can we as an organization change to explore and exploit these opportunities and possibilities? And this is what I call as leading the possible. So the leadership today, in my view, is all about moving from managing the known to leading the possible. And that's a huge mindset. And if you think about it, it is all about innovation. If there's one thing that organizations have realized, or if they haven't realized, they'll realize it soon, is that they have to innovate to survive. For long-term sustainability, innovation is extremely, extremely important. So the question is, how do you create that culture of innovation?
Yeah.
So we talk about moving from managing the known to leading the possible. It is all about ability to take risks. It's all about ability to make mistakes. It's all about ability to learn from those mistakes and moving forward. And if you look at all the new age technologies, technology companies, which are doing well, like Google or Facebook or Amazon, etc., they take pride in the fact that they fail in 9 of their 10 initiatives. And they've coined the term fail forward, which is you fail fast, learn from it, and move forward. So the organizations that are able to do that, they will be more successful, they'll be more sustainable in the long term. So in a nutshell, what I'm talking about is it's about moving from managing the known to leading the possible. It is about creating the culture of innovation. It is about making your people not afraid of taking risks. It's about making your people not afraid to making mistakes and learning from it and moving forward.
Okay, that's also making sure that we create a safe environment for them to do that, right? Without having a negative impression on them, at the end of the day. Okay, so you mentioned something about you said, Lalit, knowing the norm and moving into possibilities.
Yes.
Okay.
Possibilities. So, yes.
How do you prepare your workforce to be ready for this in terms of skills, competency, and capabilities to handle this kind of drastic unknown change, in the business landscape?
Right. So that was a very multi-dimensional question, Camelia, that you asked. So, the first part is, how do you prepare your workforce to be able to take risks and to be able to make mistakes? And what Karen earlier talked about, creating that safe environment for people. So in my view, it is all about creating a culture of forgiveness, right? Gone are the days of when organizations used to say that we are a zero tolerance company. Now, if you're a zero tolerance company, then you're also a zero innovation company, right? So the idea is to be able to forgive, right? And by forgiving, I don't mean stupid forgiving. I mean smart forgiving, right? So you can't forgive fraud and cheating, but you should forgive genuine mistakes and giving them the ability to learn from those mistakes and moving forward. So the first part of it is to create that culture of forgiveness, to create that culture of innovation for them to be able to do that. Now, the second part of your question, Camelia, was about, how do you manage the skill levels and the capabilities level, et cetera. Now, one of the things that's happening today is that the job roles are changing, right? And they will change even more in the next 5 to 10 years' time, right? According to one survey, about 1 billion jobs will be lost or displaced in the next 10 years, right? So the skills, the capabilities, the competencies that are going to be required in the next 5 to 10 years' time will be very different from what they are today, right? So the question is, how do you prepare your workforce for an environment or for the jobs that don't exist today, right? The only way, in my view, is to create or transform your workforce into what I call as lifelong learning, lifelong learners, lifelong learning workforce. Now, lifelong learning was important even 5, 10, 20 years ago as well, but it is absolutely imperative today. The workforce that is not learning all the time, they will be left behind. So to prepare yourself for the jobs that are coming in 5, 10 years time, it is all about converting or transforming your workforce into lifelong learners. Now, the one aspect of that is, how does our education system need to change to address that, right? So today, we are talking about 1-year degrees, 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, etc. They will become outdated pretty soon. So in our view, it is going to be replaced by what I call as micro certifications or micro accreditations. And the future of education is going to be just like Netflix. So every day, an AI will suggest to you, Camelia, that since this is your background, this is what you're focused on, this is what you're interested in, these are the new programs that you would be interested in, right? So just like Netflix comes out with that. Since you watch this movie, you may be interested in watching this movie. You watch this series, so you may be interested in watching this series, right? So similarly, from education perspective, it should come out on a regular basis with suggestions of new things that you need to learn on a regular basis. Now, today, everybody is doing lifelong learning. watching YouTube videos or reading articles, etc., etc. When I say they need to convert into lifelong learners, what I mean is that there needs to be a formal education, and that is where the organizations need to change. They need to make this lifelong learning as a formal part of the individual development plans and individual growth plans for individuals. And that will be extremely important for long-term resilience and long-term growth of the organization. So the organizations that are able to do this well, they are able to do it in time, will be the ones that will do well in the future, in my opinion.
Right, right. Okay, I got a question a little about this education, right? So I've known people who actually, took up MBAs and whatnot in a particular field just because they want to enter C level, qualify for C level, and they spend tons of money, their savings, and perhaps, 1 year of their precious time over weekends and whatnot to even get, a chance to enter into this panel of qualifying. So what are your thoughts about this? It's a current concept and it's been around since like, I think, 20 years, 20 years or so. So what are your thoughts about this? Should they invest more time in this?
So it is a very difficult question to answer. Okay, so I am a product of the same system. So during our times, it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Go to the best MBA schools or go to the best undergrad schools, etc., etc. I believe that the Harvards and the Yales and the Stanfords of the world are not going to go away. I think they'll still have a value to bring. There's a whole lot of basic research that happens in education. I think that these great institutes are responsible for, and they bring about great minds, and that is absolutely important and required, right? And that will continue to be there. But when you talk about Harvard and Stanford and Yale's of the world, right, you're talking about probably the top 2 percentile or top 5 percentile. Right? Mm. Now we're talking about the remaining 80, 90% of the population, right? Mm. They don't need to waste their time on 2-year degrees and 4-year degrees. The gap between what the industry needs and what our education system is providing is widening, and it is going to widen even more as we move forward. So if you do a 2-year degree, it becomes outdated in a few years' time, right after you've studied, right? So the question is, how can you bring the relevance to the education? How can you bring personalization to the education so that it's relevant and personalized to the learner, whoever he or she is learning about? So for example, in today's environment, let's say if you're a marketing director in an organization, right? You need to learn more about digital marketing, right? Because digital marketing is now 60, 70, 80% of your overall marketing budget, right? You shouldn't have to go and do a 1-year or 2-year degree in digital marketing. Somebody should be able to pull together, let's say, 20 hours of programs, right, on digital marketing to upgrade your skills to whatever you need, right? And those 20 hours, they don't need to be taught by a professor, right? Some of it could be taught by, for example, let's say marketing director of Nestle, right? Because he or she may have more practical knowledge to deliver, right? Or you may have, let's say, 2 hours of session to be delivered by the managing director of Ogilvy from the advertising perspective, right? So all that I'm saying is that the education needs to change. It needs to move from 2 4-year degrees to micro education, micro certifications, and micro accreditation. And it needs to be more relevant, and it needs to be more personalized for individuals.
Okay. So Karen, I've got a question then with regards to this, right? So micro certification versus big time degree in digital marketing. Yeah. So in your opinion, when you qualify people, when you look at resumes and whatnot, what will stand out more than maybe now or perhaps in the future, reflecting on what Lalit say? Yeah. Will you consider all these blocks of micro certification as part of a learning journey? Because we know, right? We know this is part of I think I read it somewhere that, companies invest in upgrading their employees, and this is also measured as level of engagement for their staff, right? So do you think that companies would invest in this kind of micro certification application, for your own people?
So in my point of view itself, I definitely agree with Lalit's point of view in terms of micro learning, or should I say on-demand learning. Learn it when you want to learn it based on your own pace, and also is based on the company's platform availability itself. So when you look at learning and development, it's actually one of the other key retention factors apart from compensation and benefit, the executive remuneration, or the medical and health insurance. So those are what I call the foundational benefits, or should I say the total reward standpoint. Learning and development is certainly one of the biggest reasons why people leave the organization. They don't feel that they are challenged enough, there's not enough formal support. And gone are the days where when people talk about learning, they only straight away think about classroom training. So as you can see, last year there's zero classroom training, but we all shifted into e-learning, virtual workshops. And you will notice that the duration of e-learnings or virtual workshops has to be slashed down by more than 60%, because like I said, we are constantly distracted, and you can't run a 8-hour session virtually. You just simply cannot. So you got to be innovative and say that, what can I learn in the next 90 minutes to maximize my knowledge? What do I need to learn? And certainly this is the new trend to go. So when we look at candidate resumes itself, I'll be very intrigued to see someone who has completed soft skills, for instance, like empathy, or should I say diversity and inclusion, or even other technical certifications, not necessarily just by having, I graduated from Michigan State University. I had an MBA from there. Yes, that would be certainly a plus if it's for a C-suite position. But if it's more from a management role itself, it is a nice to have. But if, let's say, it's not a deal breaker for me, because ultimately we are hiring for the transferable skill sets. Unless you're talking for an R&D role, which is really niche, then obviously a PhD in chemical or polymer, that is absolutely required.
Okay. Thank you so much, Karen, for your input, and Lalit for also your input as well. Now, Lalit, how do you deal with a diverse workforce, which includes like gig workers and millennials? Yeah.
So that's a very interesting question, because I think when we talk about things that have changed in today's environment from what it was, let's say 10, 20 years ago, I think one of the things is the increased diversity, and from diversity perspective, I'm not talking so much about race, religion, etc. I'm talking more about, having millennials as part of your workforce, and they are definitely, they think differently from the previous generation, and you need to take that into account. Secondly, the gig workers, that is a very fast increasing phenomenon, right? Do you know what percentage of workforce in Malaysia is gig workers or free agents or freelancers?
I think 30%, 30 over percent.
Absolutely. So there are about 35% of the Malaysian workforce is already gig workers. Now, what is the difference between gig workers and permanent employees, right? The gig workers, they have the freedom, they have a certain level of freedom in terms of when they want to work, how much they want to work, et cetera, right? They also know, and nobody has to tell them that if you want to earn more, you need to work harder, right? So there's a freedom and there's a certain amount of responsibility that comes with it, right, for the gig workers. Now, the question is, if 35% of the workforce is gig workers and they have a certain amount of freedom, right, do you think organizations can continue to treat their employees the way they did, let's say 10, 20 years ago? Or do they also need to start giving them a certain level of freedom in terms of how much and what they want to work on, right? So in my view, the organizations need to move towards giving more and more freedom to their employees in terms of how much they want to work, and then give them compensation based on how much they want to work, right? So the compensation needs to be based on the outputs rather than processes or inputs or whatever else that you're doing, because you can't do that for gig workers anyway, right? So, and in my view, the gig workers, the percentage of gig workers will continue to grow in the organizations as we move forward, right? So the idea is, how do you move from the current state of affairs where you have, all sorts of controls over employees, etc., to giving them more and more freedom. And if you look at the new age technology companies like Google, etc., they're already giving a lot of freedom to their employees, right? So it is a matter of time before all the other organizations will have to follow suit in some form or fashion, right? So, for example, I mean, if you are on a let's say a manufacturing factory, right? Obviously, you can't decide when you want to work. I mean, when the factory is running, you have to work, right? But there are a lot of other roles. I think you should be able to give that freedom to the employees in terms of when and how much they want to work, and the compensation to be decided based on that freedom. So I think that there's a change in the way the leaders need to start looking at their workforce in a much more open and in a much more way to provide more freedom to their employees. Yeah.
Karen, do you have any notes to add on to that?
I think what is important to note is that we are on a journey. So everyone is trying to embrace some form of flexibility and freedom. And there is also deeply rooted in terms of the company culture. So it really depends on the organization culture, whether is it a high touch organization culture, or is it the other opposite, whereby very KPI driven to say that, hey, this is your KPIs, and as long as you deliver itself, that's what matters most. The process is not important, it's very outcome driven. So I would add to say that it's not everyone wants to be like a Google itself, that's aspirational, but therefore we have to recognize the reality that Google is only probably the top 0.005% of such best practices. And for the other spectrum of the organization where there's zero flexibility or zero innovation and still hold strongly that such organization still exists. And how can we make sure that we bring people along the journey? I think that's how we measure progress.
Right. And not by throwing it. Sorry.
So just to add to that, I think that was a very, very important point, Karen. So we as leadership faculty, we try to stir things up by throwing up all these different theories, right? So, but you're absolutely right. So on one end of the spectrum is the people who are absolutely inflexible. On the other end of the spectrum is companies like Google. And I believe that most organizations, they need to start moving on that continuum towards that. So they cannot continue to be on this end of the spectrum for too long.
All right.
Absolutely.
So the culture has to start within the leadership team itself and slowly drive through the entire organization, and not just by throwing some bean bags and snooker table in the office, right? Yeah. Okay, so coming from the Kabel side, Kabel is actually a recruitment platform, a mobile-only recruitment platform that connects line managers to their job seekers directly to share or, to align values before any hirings were to take place. So in your opinion, let's start with Karen first, right? How important is it for a leader to be directly involved in recruiting their own team members in building high performance team?
To me, absolutely, that's a no-brainer question. From a hiring manager perspective, the line manager would have the biggest stake, because you are bringing a new team member on board, and your views in terms of bringing someone in to encourage the diversity of thought is very important. So the role of HR is to make sure that there is no eliminate unnecessary biases and present equally competent candidates to the hiring managers. And from there, the hiring managers would make their choice to compare against in terms of the contributions, the values. Those are the finer things which the line manager needs to identify. We talk about alignment, between what's the preferential way of working. So if some line managers are focusing much more on deliverables, if some line manager likes to be very much involved in different leadership styles, so they would have to be aware of themselves, what sort of team members they want to bring in order to develop a high performing team. Because some leaders only wants to hire high potentials, 100% high potentials itself. But then again, you need to have strong players in the business to run your function effectively. So if everyone is a high potential and turnover keeps happening every 2 years, it's going to be very detrimental for the particular function. So it has to be a very good mix, and it's a conscious decision where the manager needs to make.
Right. So you're saying that the manager needs to actually be self-aware of the whole entire composition of the team.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Karen. Over to you, Lalit.
Yeah. No, so, you know, one of the points that Karen touched upon in the previous answer was relating to the culture, you know, and in today's era, what I call as an era of disruption and distraction, right, where everything is changing, etc. I think the only thing that can hold an organization together is how strong that culture is, you know, and the culture becomes more and more important, because if you think about processes, you know, they will change all the time with the changes, right? And most of the processes, depending on how quickly the organization is able to change those processes, most of the processes in place would be probably outdated, right? So the only way to lead an organization in today's environment, in my view, is by driving a strong culture or by strong values, you know, rather than the process. So in fact, I go to the extent of the saying that people need to fire and hire based on culture rather than performance, right? So if we go with that statement, then I think it is absolutely imperative for the line managers to be involved in the hiring process, because that is where I think you need to make sure that the person that you're bringing on board is aligned with the values of the organization, right? Because if you bring somebody, and I think all of us have experienced such top performers, so-called top performers, but they're highly toxic in terms of the culture. And since they're performing well, it is difficult to fire them, right? In the organizations, I think the leaders, where they're able to make decisions quickly to be able to hire and fire based on culture and values rather than on performance, I think the long-term sustainability of organization is more ascertained that way.
If I may add on, there is this famous saying by Peter Drucker. He says that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So no matter how detailed and solid your strategy is, if the person who's executing it don't nurture the appropriate culture, the project will fail eventually.
Right, right. Interesting. Thanks, Lalit. So we have an audience, a HR practitioner from Volvo, who also wrote to us with this question. How do you turn a lackadaisical culture to a high performance culture, since we're talking about culture now, right? Is there anything else to add on with what you have actually said earlier?
I think the whole connotation of changing culture is really from the top itself. So change starts from the top, and there is a ripple effect people can actually see and feel. So how the top management wants to act on it, use the information and make tangible changes, create milestones for success, and what the success even looks like. Are they accepting this as a common norm? Is it important that where do you want to go today and how do you want to get there is very important. So I would say it's really important to actually get the top management team to be aligned first. Then everything starts from there.
Okay. So thank you very much, Lalit and Karen, and thank you to audience for having the patience, to wait for some of your questions to be answered. I have an interesting question from Teresa. Many employees in SMEs have been told to work really hard so that their job is secure. It's very real. And right now, it's an employer's market, not an employee's market. So even if that email comes in at 11 p.m. or WhatsApp comes in at 1 a.m., you have to respond. Lest you are seen as, or else you're seen as not pulling your weight, especially if everyone else is doing it. What then can an employee do in this kind of situation? 11 p.m. email, 1 a.m. WhatsApp. I think this happened to me yesterday preparing for this fireside.
Okay, so I think Teresa, that was an excellent question itself. And when we talk about pulling in our weights, it's always important to understand what is the expected outcome that we want to achieve. So if there could be a lot of times when let's look at a different perspective. Maybe the email that's being sent at 11 o'clock is the main reason why the manager itself may be having a different roles and responsibility at home, because I'm assuming that the manager is working from home and they had to settle domestic needs or even children, childcare, family duties. And once the kids are asleep, and then that's where the crunch time happens, from burning the midnight oil, trying to catch up and pulling your weight, using the same term that you have shared. So the expectation is that the manager's expectation for the direct reports to respond immediately within a 30 minutes time frame, knowing that it's 11 o'clock or even 1 a.m. Because assuming all human beings are equal, that will be an optimum sleep time that you need to recharge and re-energize yourself. So if you have daily 2 or 3 hours sleep a day, you will have long-term impact on your overall well-being. I think Lalit would be able to share the importance of sleep and having the rest and recovery period for your own self, own overall wellness. So unless, and of course, because we are so connected itself, I'm not saying that we should not respond, but only provided that you have the mental capacity and you are replying optimally itself. So what would benefit from responding to a 1 a.m. message when you're half awake or half asleep, or should I say that the power of the subconscious mind, that zone itself, not sure whether you'll be able to respond information accurately and responding it to the right respondents per se. So right. I think that's really important. I've also once reported early in my career before that I've had a manager himself who actually works optimally from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. So when I come into the office itself, I would get a string loads of emails from him, and I would start my day at 8:30. So that's what I did. Was when I was younger, is I really clarified. I really asked my manager, hey, I saw that you send me emails from this time zone, and that point in time I would be sleeping. So is it okay if I respond 12 hours later? So I seek the permission, and thankfully he agreed to that. So I guess that's different ways of working. So it's important to clarify the expectations. And it's really hard sometimes because we are working with multiple time zones. So probably from now it's actually a Friday night in the US time zone, and it could be really early morning in the Middle East. So it's important to recognize the stakeholders that you're working with, or even if, let's say, being in Malaysia context itself, right now in this kind of situation, let's clarify, that could be a different way of working, different preference, because working from home, it's not possible to be on 8 to 500%. Yeah, because we are constantly juggling with so many hats at home right now.
Definitely, but we cannot avoid having the stress and the anxiety level goes up 10 notch right after we see the WhatsApp and the email, right, Lalit? And so how do you suggest that we should be handling this situation?
No, so, if somebody's sending an email late at night and expecting you to respond, my first question will be, are you okay? So I'm going to probably ask my boss, is something wrong? And is there any way that we can help you? I think the whole title of this fireside chat was, how to lead and build effective teams, right? And when there is a lack of alignment between what the boss expects and what the team expects in terms of the responding to certain things, et cetera, obviously there's a lack of effective teamwork, because all of us at some point in our careers, we have worked late nights, long hours, etc. But there's an alignment because we think it's important, our boss thinks it's important, the organization thinks it's important, and everybody pulls themselves together to do it, right? But there are situations where there is an expectation and the team thinks that this is unfair, right? And that is where I believe that there's a lack of communication, or the lack of, or there's a level of exploitation probably happening to an extent, and that needs to be addressed. So one of the top qualities for a leader that I always talk about, and I was telling Camelia and Karen in our earlier preparatory session, is compassion. And the leaders need to have that compassion for their teams, their organizations, their customers, to be a truly good leader. And if you don't have that, that is when you have these situations where the team is not aligned, team thinks they are being exploited, or they are not being told everything that is behind that request. So I believe that it's very important to get that alignment right between what the organization is trying to do and what the team is trying to do, so that everybody is in line with the same expectations.
Okay, thank you, Lalit. So Teresa, the next time that we have another Fireside section, please invite all your SME bosses to join us in this conversation. Right, so we have a couple of minutes more. I have got another question from an anonymous attendee. Is it healthy to have competition among team members? Okay. Karen,
Yeah.
Is it healthy to have competition among, will that lead to a high performing team?
That's a very broad stroke question, in fact. When we talk about competition, I would say depending on what is the outcome that you want to achieve, because when I talk about competition, it brings me to an interesting activity that the team of mine actually did few months ago. So because we're in lockdown in different locations and I manage multi-countries itself. So what we did was we set a healthy competition of, who actually, reached the team goal around consistently having 10,000 steps a day. That's what that time all of us were in a lockdown situation. So we had that so-called competition. So that's why I was just quite drawn back, didn't know how to respond when I heard the question. But jokes aside, bringing back to the context of work, competition is certainly healthy, and also it also forces us to think about development, because we are being put into out of our comfort zone and see how much we can stretch ourselves and perform. So statistics has really shown that if someone who is being demonstrated strong learning agility, the chances of succeeding in a VUCA environment, volatile and unknown, uncertain, complex and ambiguous environment, this person would have higher chances of succeeding or thriving in such environments. And that is why most of the time you would notice that general manager profiles are very strong or demonstrate very high learning agility. So these are roles that would be considered as very VUCA. So I would certainly say yes. The short answer is yes to have competition. Otherwise, it's like sales incentive targets. So all of us have these are targets that's being set that goes up and never comes down. And yet, when you reach to that certain target, it's very rewarding because that's the fruits of your labor, and it actually shows personal accomplishments that you actually manage to hit the goals that's being assigned to you, or even sometimes exceeding targets. So that is one way of looking at growth and personal development perspective.
Okay, and since we are running out of time, we can only take that from Karen. Maybe the next question, Lalit will want to attend to this. So for a job promotion in an organization, just wonder, through this process, is it necessary performance evaluation to be done for each individual before it's proposed by the superior? I guess what he's saying is that for a promotion, should a performance evaluation be done on this individual? Lalit?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of theories about the timing of performance evaluation, and how and when that needs to be done, right? Traditionally, if you go, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, there was that annual ritual of performance and the grades and the promotion and, et cetera, right? And then came the time of that you do your performance evaluation based on the jobs that have been completed, right? So let's say if you're working on a project, at the end of the project, you do a performance evaluation and you collate those at the time of, when you're deciding on the promotion, et cetera. The ideal way that I have seen, and some of the consulting firms do it really, really well, is they have almost a weekly or a bi-weekly feedback session, and that is not so much of a performance evaluation, but it is about helping the other person to improve upon the things where he or she may not be doing well, right? So telling them, what are the things that you're doing well, the things that you're not doing well, what can you do differently to perform better, right? And I believe that that is probably a better way of evaluating or performing those kind of reviews that help the individual to go to the next level, rather than using it purely for promotion and increments. Yeah.
Okay, nice one, Lalit. Thank you. So next question from Christopher Lau. How do you manage a team of clean sheet? I guess he's saying inexperienced or that has irrelevant experience to the role. Do you change the DNA of the team and get the experienced team involved, or would you spend time training and guiding them in executing the expected role? So inexperience. So do you want to change the DNA of the team, or do you expect the whole entire team or you yourself train and guide that person to fit into that function? Karen, you want to take this?
Sure. I think in the interest of time, I'll try to keep it really short, right? First answer would be clarify the expectation with your top management itself, trying to understand what is it that we want to achieve for this particular team or function. It's really tough to have everyone with a clean sheet, inexperienced. Like I said, having a team is like having 5 fingers. Every team member has its strength and areas of development, and you may need different skill sets to pull the team together. Because if you have everyone who is actually the same, there's no difference of managing a team of robots, right? So you need different people to drive different outcome, and that's where we are better together. So that's the definition of team. My recommendation would be clearly align what is the objectives and key deliverables, then assess in terms of your respective team members who are clean sheet itself, what values that they can bring to the table, what can they contribute, and of course, certainly identify the areas of development that is in line with the employee or direct reports, personal growth and development. Because we or you may be very willing to invest your time to coach and mentor, but if the incumbent refuses to be groomed, I think that's a mismatch itself. So it's always important to have alignment. So alignment is key in this conversation here, upwards and downwards.
Okay. We have actually run out of time. Do you guys mind taking one more question before we go?
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. So Nadine Ann has got a question. What's the best advice to give a newly hired manager who would be handling an existing group of team members in the organization? So you inherited that team. Yeah.
Lalit, would you like to go first, given your vast experience in management and leadership positions?
Yeah, so I can relate to my own experience when I joined Oracle. This was way back in 2008, and I was going to lead the Asia Pacific business for Oracle for public sector and education, and I was inheriting this team of about 20 very senior, advisors. Right, these were the people who were had like about 30, 35 years of experience in their domains. And, for example, my head of justice and public safety was former CIO of Singapore Police, right? A 2-star general from Australia Defense was my head of defense, etc. Right now, so inheriting such a team, you got to get into the mode of trying to learn from them rather than trying to teach them stuff, and create an environment where they can flourish, where they can perform the best, and that is what I had to focus on, and that's what I focused on, which is to create the environment where they could deliver their best for the organization. And we did extremely well from that perspective. So go with an open mind, right? Understand what the strengths of your team members are, not from the perspective of that you're going to teach them or tell them stuff, but to learn from them and then create a plan with them, etc. So, the team leadership, in my view, is all about moving from I to we. It is about, and the term that, somebody explained to me once, and I really liked it, is that leaders need to have what he used to call as humble confidence. Confidence that you can achieve the objectives and the vision, etc., that you've set for the team, but at the same time, humility to say that I can't do it on my own. I need my team members as co-leaders to help me do that. So once you keep these principles in mind, I think you'll do well in terms of leading any kind of team in any scenario.
Great sharing, Lalit. Thank you. I hope that helps, Nadine. Okay, so thank you very much, Karen and Lalit, for sharing the valuable insights, experiences, and practices today. I truly enjoyed the session. So let's do a roundup with a takeaway of the day. Let's do a short, quick exercise with everyone, including the audience, right? One start and one stop. So what one thing that you need to start doing, and what's one thing that you need to stop doing? So start commenting, and perhaps panelists, you all can share too. What is the one thing that you all want to start doing today onwards, and what is the one stop? Karen, you go first.
Sure. I think what I would really want to start doing is really invest more in terms of micro learning.
Okay.
I've been doing a lot of readings, but in terms of e-learning itself, I've been consciously trying to pace myself given the numerous amounts of Zoom meetings that we are all in. So I'm trying to make sure that screen time is being reduced. So I think I would like to pick that up again. Thank you, Lalit. One thing that I'll stop doing is focusing on the microaggressions piece. I would want to cut that out from my dictionary entirely. Thank you.
Thank you. Lalit, how about yourself?
Yeah, so for me, one of the key things is to continue to learn and grow. And, I take every interaction as an opportunity to do that. And, from that perspective, it has helped me a lot, and I'll continue to do that. Today's session was, again, a great learning experience. Karen, thank you for sharing your thoughts. It was just wonderful to hear from you, from a practitioner, in terms of how things are being done. And, so I'll continue to do that, learn and grow.
So thank you, Lalit. Thank you, Amanda and Edmund, also for contributing your one start and one stop. So for those who have actually missed out some of the points or our earlier part of the sharing, our video will be available on demand, and you can click the link posted on either Kabel's LinkedIn page, or you can email me directly. I'll share the email across shortly. And let's all give our appreciation to our awesome guest speakers today. Click on the clap button on your screen. We can't see you. Sorry, I think there's no click. So perhaps you can type in clap, clap, clap. We can't see you, but we definitely can feel your appreciation. So for Kabel, please download the Kabel app available on your iOS and your Google Play Store. From tomorrow onwards, it's not ready today. Tomorrow onwards, it will be open for Malaysia market, for FMCG and e-commerce industries first. So for the rest of you, please hang in there, be patient. We'll come back to you shortly. So stay tuned for our session, end of May, where we'll be having another chat with another corporate leader on leadership topics. Thank you very much. Happy weekend to all. Right.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Stay
Thank you.
safe.
Bye-bye.
Yes, bye.
Thanks.